Hello and good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on what time it is for you. We hope you're safe and well in your homes. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Nisha, and I'm a product marketing manager here at AppViewX. Our topic for today is Fortify Enterprise Networks with SOAR. This webinar will be presented by Glenn Gray, Senior Solutions Architect at AppViewX. Just a little housekeeping before we begin. If you have any questions, please type them into the Zoom control panel at any time. I will bring them up during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So let's dive right into the webinar. Over to you, Glenn.
Yes, thank you, Nisha. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Glenn Gray. I'm a solutions architect with AppViewX. I come from an enterprise network infrastructure, security, and operations engineering background. I've been in the industry for over 15 years, working specifically in TCP/IP networks. So today we're going to be discussing fortifying the enterprise networks with SOAR. So on the agenda today, we're going to be describing what is SOAR and its capabilities. And for the acronym breakout there, the SOAR stands for Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. We're going to then cover reasons why SOAR is in demand. Thirdly, the SOAR for enterprise networks with AppViewX, and then open up for some question and answer. So first of all, what is security orchestration, automation, and response? Well, Gartner has defined it as security orchestration, automation, and response as the technologies that enable organizations to take inputs from a variety of sources. Now, most of those are security information and event management systems, but then to apply workflows aligned to processes and procedures. These can be orchestrated via integrations with technologies and automated to achieve a desired outcome and/or greater visibility. The adoption trend as far as SOAR is anticipated by the end of 2020 to be introduced into 30% of the organizations with a security team larger than 5 people. And this will leverage the SOAR tools in their security operations and bringing them from less than 5% where they currently reside today. So that's a fairly dramatic trend over 2 years as we stand now in 2020, from a 5% increase to a 30% increase. So what are some of the reasons behind this growth in security orchestration, automation, and response demand increase? First of all, the threats that enterprise environments face are increasing. Not only in the number of events, i.e. the volume, but the sophistication. So being able to identify and model threats is becoming more challenging. The old mechanisms, the old indicators, detectors aren't necessarily as effective because bad actors are continuously coming up with new and ever more creative ways. Then improving the alert triage quality and speed. Obviously, the ability to not only identify, but react and remediate a threat within your IT infrastructure is extremely important. If the identification and resolution to threat instances is delayed, then that directly impacts the ability for the IT services to function, and in most cases, the ability to continue to provide service, generate revenue, and result in a direct impact to not only the ability to operate a IT service provider, but the ability to provide services to customers. There's also the need for a centralized view of threat intelligence. From my experience in operations and engineering, the gathering of data via manual efforts, going from one security gateway to a compute resource to a layer 3 gateway, through analytics and statistics from reporting structures, gathering all of that information to create your holistic view and assess and evaluate and then determine what is the viable approach for remediating a threat is extremely time consuming when you're having to go from one IT resource or infrastructure, device, gateway, whatever the case may be, to another, to another, to another in order to manually correlate the information. So the need to centralize and gather the information into a single pane of glass so that you can evaluate the threat and make intelligent decisions based upon those threat indicators is ever more important. And that reduces the time to respond and contain or remediate the threat. You also want to reduce the unnecessary routine and work for analysis. So coupling all of those factors together really make up an ability to have an effective security orchestration, automation, and response solution. So that brings us to 3 of the key capabilities of a successful SOAR system. 1, threat and vulnerability management. 2, security incident response. 3, security operations automation. So to describe a little bit more about that threat and vulnerability management, can I identify and access what is determined to be a threat? What is potentially a vulnerable point within my infrastructure? Then how do I respond? Do I have to first create incident tickets and then go about issuing those incident tickets to the appropriate triage resources or skill sets? The operations and automation, if I've detected a abnormality, can I automate the process of making a deterministic change within my infrastructure to effectively remediate the security threat or vulnerability? So as described in the Gartner report, SOAR can be the central hub for an organization to achieve several goals: monitoring the event from resources like SIEM or other security controls, orchestrating different security products to construct the context, and then helping to prioritize multiple concurrent items and incidents, and then drive a response. So breaking that down just a little bit, yes, you have SIEM resources collecting incident and event alerts or managing incident and event alerts. You also have other security controls, the other infrastructure resources themselves, your analytics or diagnostics or statistics collections points that are alarming, perhaps on threshold exceed incidents, the number of the amount of traffic flowing through a particular link or gateway. Those are some of the examples, but those are sort of abnormalities where some threshold has been breached. Then the orchestrating of the different security products. So if I have all of these alerts coming in, can I intelligently sort of prioritize them to hone in on, is this internal origination? Is this edge threat? Is where is the vulnerability actually coming from? Because in many cases you have additional threats, like you'll have multiple alert indicators, but which is most important? Which is most insightful as to this is where the vulnerability exists, and this is what you would want to do in order to remediate it at this particular IT infrastructure gateway. And then that leads to that prioritization of the multiple and concurrent event items, and then effectively driving a response, making a remediation either change or some command structure that you'll want to apply in order to eliminate the threat. So SOAR for enterprise networks with AppViewX. How can AppViewX platform help to establish an effective SOAR system and introduce it into adoption and bring it into mainstream practices overall, and increase the effectiveness of your security operations centers? Well, first of all, a little bit about AppViewX as a company. We have 7 locations. We're a global company, and we have primarily Fortune 500 companies over multiple industries. Now, the network security orchestration and automation with AppViewX basically breaks down into 4 components or topics. There's the network scanning and monitoring, the ability to manage and communicate with devices within your infrastructure. Those devices could be firewall security gateway appliances. They could be web application firewalls, application security modules, load balance resources, compute resources, existing SIEM resources, Splunk, and other security scanning resources. So we're not necessarily taking the place of what's currently in existence, but more integrating with those to collect the information and and enhance the intelligence that they're providing and capabilities to further the orchestration and automation capabilities. There's the incident and problem management. So the ability to build in intelligence to identify where abnormalities occur, where there's a potential for threat detection. Could be a threshold indicator. It could be a triggered event from your existing security management, security gateway devices, ASM, WAF, load balance, traffic forwarding gateways, compute resources, right? They're going to initiate some incident or problem indicator. And then you have the threat and vulnerability mitigation. So once you have these indicators and you're able to identify with what is most important, what is relevant, what do I do? That leads to the threat mitigation. So I can identify that there is a perhaps a security gateway policy that has been violated, triggered, an ASM, a WAF security policy violation that has been triggered. Now I can create the automation and orchestration to impose a mitigation strategy, whether it's applying additional blacklisting, non-permit of traffic flows. That's where the AppViewX platform can provide that detectable threat and vulnerability mitigation strategy and invoke automation. Then you have the context-aware troubleshooting and auto remediation. So with that concept of context-aware troubleshooting. You have the full visibility of your infrastructure, regardless of the vendor, regardless of the technology service type. So again, load balance infrastructure, even certificate authority, SSL TLS management, firewall security, WAF, ASM, cloud environment, all of that is able to be managed within the AppViewX purview so that you have this context-aware troubleshooting of the application-centric domain, the visibility to look at the complete path and service delivery points that traffic flows in and out of relative to particular application instances. So the intelligent network solution or network security automation capabilities of AppViewX start off with the scan and discovery of network objects or network infrastructure platforms so that you can manage them within the AppViewX inventory. It's very simplistic in the fact that you're communicating with the infrastructure and you're able to, without agent deployment, connect to, and that's typically via SSH or the REST API that is inherent within your infrastructure resources themselves. So we're able to communicate with them and in real time identify the analytics, the status of the infrastructure. We can continuously monitor the network with that real-time data. The solution notifies engineers and teams through a variety of communication mechanisms, whether that be email, chats, Splunk, instant messaging. We can communicate effectively out to the appropriate stakeholders in the case of detection. Then you have network security teams that can create a low-code remediation workflow for identified incidents. So that would allow you the opportunity to identify what are your threshold parameters for application services and create in a low-code fashion remediation steps to resolve and address incidents that occur outside of these trigger events or threshold related cross events, and all in that application centric context awareness. You can automate and streamline your web application firewall and network firewall policy management and approvals. So we can also integrate with your ITSM platforms, your ticketing solutions, so that when things are identified, we're not bypassing, we're not forgetting about ITIL type structures for change management procedures. It can be identified, change management, RITM, items can be created in a variety of ITSM platforms, ServiceNow, Remedy, Jira. Those are just a couple of the examples so that these events are tracked and the appropriate incident response, change control, and ticketing responsibilities are incorporated, as well as notification communication to stakeholders. And finally, the remediation, the ability to push these controls and changes into your network infrastructure. Then finally, apart from being a vendor and an environment agnostic, meaning that we're not designed to support just one vendor solution, we can support the full gamut of your well-recognized vendor product lines and services, as will be shown in a later slide. But we can also integrate with those ITSM tools, as I mentioned, and collect information from existing SIEM log platforms, and provide the incident management and alarm aggregation and communication. So security monitoring, automation, and troubleshooting, how can the AppViewX platform sort of enhance that? Well, we can give that application security operations team a topology view, an application-centric topology view of network security infrastructure. So all the way from, the application identity itself, like its IP, its fully qualified domain name, and then the full path through your infrastructure as it proceeds through gateway points like application domain controllers or load balancers, firewall, WAF, ASM, um, processing resources, all the way down to the server endpoints, and even integrate with certificate authorities and issuing bodies, whether those are external or internal certificate signing authorities, to really give you this holistic management view in an application-centric form. So you'll get better insights into the security health, the state, the status, the utilization, and performance of each of your applications. You'll be able to troubleshoot the outages with views of the infrastructure that deliver the applications themselves. It really goes a long, long way in reducing that manual uh, data gathering exercise that is typically the response for incident service related occurrences where you're having to go to multiple gateways, gather the information, make some discovery identifications, then on to the next gateway within your infrastructure, and the next, and the next. So really piecing together all of this information from an operational support and engineering support perspective is very, very time consuming when you're going from one device to the next, issuing multiple commands. And oftentimes it takes a full team of support members working together, integrating. You have to have skill set 1, skill set 2, 3, and 4 all coming together, providing relevant data, and just spinning up that communication link and the incident response team is time consuming in and of itself. So it gives the end user the ability to self-service and initiate or launch an automation response when you've gathered all of this information and you have the ability to identify the application-centric route path across the infrastructure regardless of vendor. So what are some of the views that the AppViewX platforms that will allow and enhance the ability to optimize the network security across your infrastructure? Well, this screen capture here is depicting one view of a dashboard that is out of the box, pre-built within the AppViewX platform. And this one is particularly focusing on security gateway policy definitions. So whether these security policy definitions are across multiple vendor platforms or a single vendor platform, the view remains the same. It's really vendor agnostic. So you can identify with a policy structure as it's distributed across your environment and get reports and indicators like hit count, which you can then apply threshold indicators on, and then further produce automated orchestrated responses in case things are exceeded. So you can enforce how the configuration and the policies are introduced into the network security infrastructure. You're defining the methodology and approach to accurately and without human error policy deployment. You can expose the configuration and policy that is being leveraged in the infrastructure, and you can automate how unused resources are returned back to the network security infrastructure. I know in my experience, the deployment of security policy definitions was of routine practice. However, the retirement of the security policies as applications are retired oftentimes are not removed. And in addition, many of the security policies can overlap. So you'll have gateways, you'll have WAFs, you'll have ASMs, things like that, where there are orphaned instances of security policy definitions. Even in ADC load balance environment, services are created, but they're never retired. So you have the ability to analyze and then automate recovery of these unused resources that will free up your DDI infrastructure, your configuration sets within your security gateway policy definitions, your ADC deployment systems, so that you don't have a glut of retired, orphaned configuration sets. And you can even look to optimize your security policy definitions where you have overlap. You may have Rule 1 and Rule 2 where they're neighboring subnets or IP address definitions, and they could be combined into a single security gateway policy definition as opposed to multiple. So all of these things come together to provide the ability to really optimize your network security infrastructure, reducing the complexity, reducing the time and effort that it takes to manage. So talk a little bit about the firewall as a service, the web application firewall as a service. Because we can integrate, communicate, manage those infrastructure devices, you're enabled common network firewall and WAF service requests to be self-serviced by application and operation teams. Many enterprise now have to communicate issuing the lengthy process and slow service level agreement turnaround times for manipulating such security appliances and gateways. We can dramatically speed up and not only enforce the deployment, the successful deployment and update of these gateways, but extend it as a self-service with appropriate review, escalation, or approval steps. We can enforce how firewall and WAF elements are instrumented into the network infrastructure. We can minimize the operational expense of maintaining the automation workflows when changing vendors or versions, meaning that if you're going to be migrating from one platform vendor to another, we can help to automate that process by establishing low-code workflows that are going to take your individual security parameters. This is often the need from an application-centric view. You don't just take the entire configuration set because all application suites and application services aren't ready at one particular time, but you can provide define workflow strategies for migrating from existing legacy service gateways, service platforms to a new service gateway, service platform, and again, individually in a application by application manner. You can abstract vendor or version changes from the end users by requesting the firewall and WAF services. So again, where there are major code releases, upgrade releases by a vendor, a lot of times syntax changes, the underlying schema of the platform can change significantly. So while you may have dissimilar gateways in one environment versus another environment, you can service both without the extensive pain of having to accommodate for skill sets that can manage both of the underlying architectural variations. And this is by defining these workflow structures in a low-code format. And the image that's depicted there is an example of form input where you're really honing in and defining the exact user-defined attributes that need to go into a particular workflow initiation sequence. And it's showing you the initiation of the workflow sequence and individual task sequences that are broken down and go into that. So you have your basic input forms, you have your work order generation, you have your command syntax generation, your approval or escalation for the change itself, and then finally the implementation. So we can work in these pre-post validations, plus with the command generation, it's taking the user-defined attributes that are provided and removing the complexity of having to understand the technology platform itself from the requestor. In my experience, it had been a real pain point with the multiple skill sets from compute to security to network to load balance to application development, really bringing those stakeholders together so that they can communicate effectively. Um, you know, it had been many times where the ticket was submitted because you have a service catalog for security policy or application deployment request mechanisms, and it was trial and error. I submitted something from a developer's perspective that I thought was meaningful. However, when it came to the engineer administrator of the platform itself, it was lost in translation. The terms, the things that were being asked were not meaningful in the context of the stakeholder or skill set of the deployment engineer. So it would be rejected and then it starts over. So it's that old kids game of go fish. Do you have any? No, go fish. So that leads to sort of rinse and repeat. I made a request, it came back to me, really no explanation other than rejected, so I made another guess. And again, rejected, came back, and finally you get into a communication link of, I'm looking for specifically this. Oh, well, this is the way that you need to submit it. So really removing that and providing form-based inputs for user-defined attributes that are meaningful throughout the workflow sequence, and honing specifically on what attributes need to be identified. So coming towards the end of the slide deck here, the AppViewX platform, its low-code automation capabilities, this slide is meant to demonstrate how we can bring together all of the ecosystem, which consists of multiple vendors, right? From certificate authorities to application domain controllers to firewall WAF security appliances to DDI to HSM vault mechanisms to ITSM platforms. And so we can support, communicate, manage all of that infrastructure in real time and provide the ability to manage it across your hybrid environment, whether it's public cloud, private cloud, on-prem, and extend that through role-based access control, which leverages your existing identity and access management resources. So that's Active Directory, LDAP, single sign-on SAML, Radius TACACS. So we're allocating the ability to interface through the AppViewX platform as an automation and orchestration engine, and only allocate or publish the workflow services, visibility, command, control, whether it's read, write, at a very, very granular level. What I mean by granular is down to the individual objects within that infrastructure, within that ecosystem. So one particular virtual service and its pool members, one particular service policy, uh, uh, a subset of your IP address management, you know, down to subnet or individual IP ranges, only certain keys within HSM, only certain functions within your ITSM service catalog. So really very granular, and attribute those and just those to your individual skill sets, stakeholders, organizational units, work groups. So that on the far left, breaking it out by some descriptive organizational units, your application engineers, your network operations engineers, your security ops engineers, your DevOps, and so forth. So that is, in a single slide, the overall view of how the AppViewX platform allows for the capability to perform automation and orchestration and extend in a central pane of glass your entire IT ecosystem and enable that self-servicing capability from that application-centric view. So I want to open up for any questions and answers. Feel free to type those into the Q&A, and I'd be happy to answer any concerns or thoughts. There had been one question posed earlier, was does the AppViewX have SOAR capabilities? And that is what we've been describing here up to this point. If there's any clarification needed, please do add that in. Well, question maybe for the attendees that might invoke some thought. As far as within your individual enterprise or business, as it relates to security orchestration, automation, and response, what are some of the challenges or objectives that your organization is particularly focused on? If anyone would care to share any thoughts. Okay, no thoughts. Well, it seems we're a bit light on the question and answer today, but well, there was one additional question of what kind of SIEM resources and integrations do we support? We can support the event identity management indicators from pretty much any alert or event or incident management platform. We can ingest those through REST API integration. We can also ingest those through an SNMP trap detection. So once the characteristics of any of those event or incident triggered notifications come in, we can identify with the meaningful data points within that, such as what device it came from, the specifics of the threat or incident or event detection, whether they're IP address based, any identifier within the context of the platform itself to locate, detect, and then remediate the event or incident by manipulating the infrastructure device itself, gateway, ADC, compute resource. If it were a certificate expiry, intermediate key, let's say that had been exposed, those could be remediated. Again, security policy definitions, threshold breached for the number of requests, SYN attack, DDoS, things like that, even down to ASM with highly complex attacks on database resources, right? Whatever rule parameter has been defined, those rule parameter violations can be identified through the SIEM collection point, and based upon your profiling of your automation orchestration workflow structure would be handled per the design of the remediation workflow. Hopefully that answered the question there. if there are any others. I'll pause for a couple of seconds here.
One of our attendees raised their hands, Glenn. So, Arun Kumar, do you have any questions that you want to ask Glenn?
Hi, yeah, thank you. So Glenn, actually, I'm looking out for a tool which helps in now identifying or narrowing down a false positive events, right? So for example, we do have our own SOC. We build our own SOC tool with Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, right? The frequent or most commonly used platform. So we have a lot of false positive, and it's a internal team what we are supporting in, not the external customers. So uh, we have a lot of false positive coming in. And most of the times we end up in identifying the issue which is performed by IT team. Now, how does AppViewX help, or the SOAR tool in this particular place is going to help in reducing the false positive?
Sure. So if you can profile and identify the parameters which are really descriptive of the false positive event, whether it's been initiated from, say, an internal resource or a segment of the network or a user that is inherently not a valid threat, those indicators, those identifiers, now maybe that information exists within some other resource like your IAM, but the identification of the user source subnet, things like that, the parameters, the type of event that has been detected may need to be cross-validated with additional OSS tools or infrastructure resources to determine, because your profile for the event is triggered such that it's not taking those things into consideration, and the resource that triggers them doesn't have the ability to integrate and communicate with the external tools, OSS platforms, resources, and thus you're having to manually identify with the alert, cross-check, validate it with these additional resources and platforms and information sources. That is where the AppViewX platform can provide the workflow construct to automate that, so that when a detection, a alert, an incident, a triggering event has occurred, it can be then cross-validated with the routine, the process, what you're perhaps currently doing manually for that validation, and determine it as a non-threat. And if ticketing has already been created, it can resolve those ticketing items and so forth.
Got it.
Is there a manner, an approach that you're typically adhering to really reduce those as non-threats? If I might inquire, without getting within proprietary information of how you address your events, is that how you're currently mitigating those false positive events, by collecting additional information for that validation?
No, most frequently we do check with the relevant stakeholders to identify. So, for example, if there is any script which is being executed by end no endpoints, right, or end host, for example, Trend Micro, right. So I mean, IT team often perform a script to identify whether every system is up to date, patched or not. From the SOC perspective, we found that some malicious script is running in, so that's where it becomes kind of a alert for us, and we have to go and check with the internal stakeholders. So we end up in wasting their time as well. So we started looking at the change management, whatever is happening, and that is a one way to control the false positive at this point in time. But however, there are other unwanted activities which is still popping up in the environment.
Okay. So the communication mechanisms also could be effective in that use case scenario where the stakeholders, the responsible organizational units are notified that an event has been triggered, and it could consequently issue communication out to those organizational units, over instant messaging, over email, and so forth, so that the parameters of the event are relayed to them, and removing the need for individual manual interaction to first identify, then gather the attributes of the event, and then initiate a communication out and say, is this a result of something that your organizational unit has initiated? If so, we need to identify it as non-threat now and mark this as resolved either in our SIEM instance or incident response processes. That could be a potential use case and approach to resolving it with the AppViewX automation platform.
All right. Got it. So, yeah.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you so much too. Yeah.
Well, if there are no others, bringing us to the final slide, which is how to communicate, how to reach out to AppViewX in case you would like to have further discussions, customized demonstrations, other previews. We have our contact information down there on the bottom line. The AppViewX website will invite you to a chat that one of our agents would engage with you in live, or email, which is info@appviewx.com. And we would certainly like to engage in a one-on-one discussion, further product demo. So please don't hesitate, if it's at all of an interest to you, to get us engaged further. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining this morning, afternoon, or evening, and stay safe and healthy, and we'll look forward to further engagements out there in the community. Nisha, anything you want to close out with?
Thank you, Glenn. That was a great session. So thank you all for joining us today. So I hope you found the session insightful. We look forward to seeing you again at our next session, and the rate and agenda of that will be shared shortly in an email. Thank you and have a good day. Take care.